Hey guys, it's Yorkie here, and welcome to episode 18 of the in-depth track guide series for Assetto Corsa Competizione. Just before we get into the video that's going to give you all the juicy details in order to improve your lap times around this track, I just wanted to say, if you're new to the channel and enjoying this in-depth track guide series, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It will be very much appreciated, and if you want to follow me on other social media pages, my links are down in the description below. Now for this 18th episode, we're going to be taking a look at the technical circuit that is Snetterton, located in the United Kingdom. The track's length is 2.96 miles, which equates to 4.77 kilometers and features 12 corners. The setup that you want to run for the circuit will require medium to high downforce with medium suspension, and then the key action areas where you can overtake are going to be turns 1, turn 2, turn 4, turn 8, turn 9 and turn 12. So as per usual, our first port of call is going to be the pit lane entry, and we are going to be getting hard on the brakes pretty much as soon as we come onto the pit entry slip road. We just need to watch out for that little kink there, as we're going to be hard on the brakes trying to slow the car down for the pit speed limiter line. This is where the line is actually positioned. It is there right at the end of the black tyre stack that is on the right hand side of the pit lane when you come into it, and then the pit exit point is going to be after the marshal hut between the two traffic lights that are there up against the Armco barrier on either side of the pit exit slip road. At this point, disengage the pit limiter and then accelerate out onto the circuit. The exit slip road runs pretty much all the way down to the very first part of the inside curbing. For turn 1, you don't need to quite run that far. You can start to cross over the dotted white line a bit earlier to open up the corner for yourself, but do watch out for any fast cars approaching that corner. So moving on to the main part of the circuit, we're obviously going to begin with turn 1, and this is our braking point here. We're going to be referencing the brake marker board with a single slash through it. It's a relatively short braking zone, and we're going to truck the car in third gear into the corner. We want to hook up a relatively early-ish apex, but we don't actually need to clip the inside curbing there, and instead focus on hitting a second later apex marked here. You should be in third gear. Although there's no camber, there is a slight dip in the mid corner which you can use to your advantage. You just need to be very careful of the inside curb. It dips down through the middle part of the corner, and then later on there comes quite a big nasty bump, and if you clip that can heavily unsettle the car. So do try and avoid it, or take heavy caution with it in both the dry and wet conditions. The exit creeps up on you fairly quickly, and there isn't a huge amount of room here. There's a single width serrated curb with some painted tarmac just beyond that, and then over the other side of that is pure grass. There is quite a bit of room out there just in case you do run out wide, but obviously that's undesirable. In the dry conditions, you should be able to use this curb pretty much no problem, and also in the wet conditions you should be fine to run this curb a little bit. Just take some caution, as obviously it's going to be a little bit more slippery. Next up is the braking point for turn 2, and we're going to be referencing the double slash board on the left hand side of the circuit there. In case that one gets taken out, you can use the end of the barrier that's marked orange on the right hand side of the track as reference, but you're going to be braking very hard here down into first gear for what is a very tight hairpin. You want to be focusing on hooking up a late apex. You don't need to run the curb through the corner, but instead try and focus on getting a good drive out of the turn. As I said, first gear, no camber. You can use the inside curb if you really wanted to in the dry, also in the wet, but generally you don't actually need to clip the curb in order to get a good run through the corner. Coming out through the exit, there is a bit of tarmac runoff out here with the alternate layout of Snetterton, and due to that alternate layout there is a bit of serrated curbing that runs adjacent to the direction of travel that we are going to be going in. This adjacent serrated curb then has a little bit of a drop going down the other side onto the grasscrete. This is going to obviously impact your run off the corner, so be careful with it in the dry conditions. You should be fine. However, you don't want to take the exit curb too aggressively, and you'll definitely want to be avoiding it in wet conditions when the track and the curb is more slippery. We then come in towards turn 3, and we want to be positioning our car on the right hand side of the circuit. Reference for the braking point in and around here is a little bit more difficult. I tend to judge it based off of the two boards with the arrows there. I tend to brake about 10 to 15 meters before I reach those, and then turn the car in, aiming to hook up a late apex once again in third gear. Some cars may require you to use second, but generally you should be fine in third. As for making use of the inside curb, you can do so in both the dry and wet conditions pretty much no problem. The key to the corner is being patient on the throttle, as getting on it too aggressively, too early, will send you running out too far out wide. There is a serrated curb out here with some grasscrete and a tiny little slither of unpainted tarmac, but this runoff is pretty aggressive with the grasscrete being quite bumpy. If you end up straddling the curb, you can find yourself bottoming out on it, so do be careful of that. Use this curbing in the dry conditions, however do take good care and caution with it in the wet. Next up is the braking zone for turn 4, where we're again going to be on the right hand side of the circuit. After that Sunoco sign that is there in the bottom right of the picture, we are looking for the board with the 2 slashes through it. That is our braking point. We're going to get hard on the brakes there, shifting all the way down into first gear. Again, with this hairpin being quite tight, we're going to be focusing and looking for a late apex. This is where we're going to be getting onto the throttle and starting to accelerate out of the corner in first gear. No camber to help you, serrated curb on the inside. Whilst it's not key to actually clip or run the curb, obviously you want to be nice and tight to it, and if you do end up running the curb, you'll be fine to do so in both the dry and wet conditions. On the exit of turn 4, we've got a single width serrated curbing with some grasscrete beyond it and then some painted tarmac. There's a bit of room out here to make use of with the acceleration coming off of the corner. However, once again, the grasscrete is a little bit bumpy and you can find yourself catching or bottoming out the car if you're straddling the curb. Use this runoff area to your advantage if you can in the dry conditions, however you'll want to be avoiding it pretty much entirely in the wet. Turn 5 is a relatively tricky and deceptive left-hander. Braking reference is once again a little bit sparse for this turn. You can either judge it by braking about 20 odd meters before the 2 boards with the left-handed arrows in them, or you can reference the Marshall hut on the left-hand side of the track there and brake about 10 meters before reaching that. When turning the car in, you should be doing so in third gear at about 140 odd kilometers an hour. You want to avoid hitting that tyre stack on the inside, as that will damage the car. So instead, just brush the curb that is there on the inside. It is quite heavily serrated, but this curb should be fine to use or brush in both the dry and wet conditions. Coming off the corner, we've got a single width serrated curb with some grasscrete beyond it. The amount of grasscrete out here is a little bit more than some of the other corners, so you can make use of that in the dry conditions, providing you keep 2 wheels either on or inside the white lines. You'll be fine with track limits. And once again, the area of grasscrete on the outside of the curb is quite bumpy, so if you end up straddling the car over the curbing, you could find yourself bottoming out the floor or the splitter or diffuser as you run over the curb. So whilst you'll be fine to use the curb in the dry conditions, do take caution with it, and of course avoid it pretty much entirely in the wet, as is a bit of a key traction zone. Next up, we have the braking zone for turn 6, and our braking reference points are going to be the 2 boards that straddle either side of the circuit with the right-handed arrows on them. Here you want to get hard on the brakes and shift the car down into second gear, turning the car in and aiming to take as much of the curbing on the inside as we possibly can. You can dip your wheels over the other side of the serrated curb onto the grasscrete and make use of that. If you could do so, you'll shave a few extra meters off the corner and make the track a little bit shorter for yourself, and you can do this in both the dry and wet conditions with pretty much no issue, providing you got the car settled and the car is comfortable in taking that inside curb. Coming off the exit of the corner, you want to hang towards the middle of the circuit as you go through the second part of the right-hander, and then once it does become straight, that's when you can run the car out towards the outside of the circuit, the left-hand side of the track. There is no curbing or any kind of runoff out here. It is purely just straight grass, so obviously avoid that when coming off the corner. But very quickly we come into the braking zone for turn 6, the fast right-hander leading onto the back straight. The braking points that I tend to reference here are either the darker patches on the circuit or braking about 5 meters before the green painted tarmac on the left hand side of the track actually ends. Now this corner is absolutely vital for a good run onto the long back straight and maximizing your speed on that. So again, we're going to focus on a late apex. When you initially turn the car in, don't go all the way to the inside curb, instead hang about a car width away from it and then aim to actually clip the curb a bit later on in the corner after the tyre stack that is there on the inside. You can use this curb in the dry and also the wet conditions, pretty much no issue, but if you hit the apex at the right point, you should be able to get hard onto the throttle and accelerate off the corner with good speed and momentum. We can then track the car out to the left where the exit curb is waiting for us, which is a serrated single width curbing with a little bit of green painted tarmac just beyond that. Not really too much runoff. Again, this curbing is quite bumpy and also aggressive, so generally we don't want to be riding it not too heavily, as that could potentially unsettle the car and hurt our momentum off the corner. So in the dry conditions, I'd say take caution with this curb. In the wet conditions, you pretty much want to avoid it entirely. After a very long back straight, we then come into what is probably the most difficult braking zone of any track in the world. The braking zone for turn 9 as you come through turn 8. Our reference for our braking point is going to be the single/brake marker board just before we get to the bridge. We're going to get hard on the brakes and try and bleed as much of the speed as we possibly can before we get to the curbing on the inside of turn 8. We then need to roll off the brakes to bring the car back into the inside of the corner and bring us parallel and back in tight to the left hand side of the track, where we're going to do the remainder of our braking before turning into the right hander of turn 9. We want to hook up the apex on the inside curb here. Avoid the large sausage curb that is on the inside, because that will bounce the car and likely send you off into a spin. You want to be in either first or second gear depending on the car's gear ratios that you are driving, and you can use this inside serrated curb minus the sausage curb in both the dry and also the wet conditions. Then when it comes to the exit of this corner, we've once again got a single width serrated curb with some grasscrete beyond it, and once more this grasscrete is quite bumpy, so you do need to watch out for that when running this curb in the dry conditions. And in the wet conditions, you'll be wanting to avoid this curbing pretty much entirely, as it is a key traction zone and the wet slippery paint will cost you that traction. Next up is the right hander of turn 10. There is no braking zone for this corner, you just simply need to lift off and let the car coast through the turn a little bit before getting back on the accelerator. As this corner is named bomb hole due to the quite severe dip in it, you can use that to your advantage with the little bit of camber that is here to help drive you through the corner a little bit quicker than you would initially expect. And the curbing on the inside here you can use in both the dry and wet conditions. On the exit of turn 10, we've once again got a single width serrated curb with some rather bumpy grasscrete beyond that, and then a very thin sliver of painted tarmac. As that grasscrete is once again bumpy, generally you want to be running the serrated curb but not really dipping your wheels too far beyond it. Use the curb in the dry conditions and you'll be wanting to avoid this curb in the wet. Next up is the long right hander of turn 11, which leads us directly into the braking zone of the final corner, the left hander of turn 12. Getting the braking for that final corner is going to be the absolute key, so that's what we're going to need to focus on all the way through this long right hander. So here's how we're going to approach it. We're going to hit one apex fairly early on in the corner, tight to the inside. Continuing to carry a bit of speed through the corner, we're going to let the car start to drift towards the middle of the track as we come through the mid part just before we get to the curbing, where we're going to hook up a second point here, and then we're going to start to decelerate the car and let it roll through, bringing it back tighter to the inside of the corner and hooking up this point here, which should then give us a nice straight braking zone for that final turn. Now being tight to the right hand side of the track with a nice straight braking zone, we should be getting hard on the brakes at the third to last set of double orange pillars that are there on the right hand side of the track. We're going to brake hard and shift the car down into either first or second gear depending on your car's gear ratios, turn the car in, aiming to hook up the inside serrated curb, and again we want to be avoiding that large sausage curb on the inside, as that will likely put us into a spin. If you get this corner hooked up right, you should be able to use the inside curb in both the dry and wet conditions, and then we're going to get hard on the power accelerate off the turn, tracking the car out wide to the exit, where we've again got a serrated curb with some grasscrete beyond that waiting for us. Again, the grasscrete is a little bit bumpy, so we do need to be careful of that, and there is also a nasty bump at the end of the curbing as well, so we need to be back on track before we hit that. Obviously in the dry conditions you are fine to use this curbing and the grasscrete out here, however as this is coming off a slow corner and again it's a key traction zone, you'll be wanting to avoid it in the run to the start finish line in the wet conditions. So now that we've completed a breakdown of the lap, let's jump on board and piece it all together at racing speed. So now that we set a pretty reasonable lap around Snetterton, I just want to finish off the episode by saying please be mindful of what your car and car setup is capable of. Some cars will be able to brake a little bit later than others. Some cars will be able to take curves better than others. It's obviously going to be dependent on your car setup. It may have a slight factor as well. And then obviously the weather conditions are going to play a factor too. Obviously I've tried to highlight these things where possible, but please do take note and obviously apply accordingly to the session, race or conditions that you're driving in. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the episode. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you hit the bell notification, you'll be notified each time a video goes live and you won't miss out on any future content. I hope to see you back for the next one. Until then, have fun, stay safe and take care.